As we have heard so many times before, again also now, the reminder that it is necessary by all means, before we undergo any type of Dharma activity, be it listening or reflecting, that we make sure that we're possessed of the proper attitude. The proper attitude, we have heard, is the one that allows us to act for the benefit of beings. How do we bring this attitude about? We do so by way of reminding ourselves that it is necessary to bring about all the awakening of Buddhahood for all beings, that it is necessary to establish all of these beings in the awakening of Buddhahood. If we were possessed of that particular attitude each and every time we go about whatever sort of Dharma endeavor, then our attitude will be the proper one. And also, particularly in this case here, whenever we come together to listen to more instructions, to more Dharma teachings, we should give rise to this attitude. We should think that with this attitude at heart, in order to bring about the benefit and welfare and eventually the awakening of Buddhahood for the sake of beings, we request and we listen to the precious Dharma instructions such as are being given here, the instructions which come on the title of the union of Mahamudra and Mahahati. As we have heard this morning, the very essence of all practice, of all Dharma for that matter, is to simply habituate oneself to allow mind to rest in its natural state, to allow mind or consciousness for that matter to be conscious of itself. That is what needs to be trained in, and nothing other than that. And that being the case, there is nothing other that needs to be trained in. We do not need to imagine ourselves in the shape of a deity of different colors with different attributes and hands and faces, etc. and so forth. We just need to train ourselves or habituate ourselves to allow our mind to watch itself, to allow consciousness to be conscious of itself. There is not a single Dharma teaching, not a single Dharma instruction that would not be contained in this simple practice. It's the most essential practice of all, and that is what essentially needs to be trained in, nothing further than that. So essentially what we need to train in is free of any elaboration of form of a deity or attributes or anything of that sort. Simply, undistractedly rest in mind-nature. Allow consciousness to be conscious of itself. Occasionally we may think that this may indeed succeed and train accordingly, but then occasionally we may be beset by all sorts of distractions for that matter in the way of either hope, ideas or concepts of hope, that our practice may go well, that it may be successful, or fear that it may not be successful, that we may be distracted, that we would be distracted in any which way whatsoever, and therefore not perform form a successful meditation session. All of that is rather unconstructive, all of that is to be discarded, is to be avoided to the very best of our ability, and we simply need to train to look, to rest as undistractedly as possible in the recognition of that what is going on within our mind streams at any particular given moment. Be there thoughts or be there no thoughts, be mind completely tranquil and quiet, or be it active with all thoughts of ideas and memories or whatever. Simply train in being aware of what it is that happens. Simply at any given moment look freshly and undistractedly into the very essence of what it is that presents itself. That is what needs to be trained in, nothing further than that. The first line of the next verse of our text says, when training in the main part of the practice, or when engaged in such training, in the main practice. Generally speaking, when we talk about practice, or meditation for that matter, we speak of the two periods, the period of meditation itself and the post-meditation period. The period of meditation is the session when we actually sit down and train ourselves in the various meditation techniques, and the period after that is, of course, everything that comes after the former meditation session, where we're up and out and about again, doing whatever it is that we're doing. When actually sitting down to meditate, wherever, whenever, we would be well advised not to entertain any particular thoughts of either past, present, or future. At that particular time, such thoughts are not particularly useful and are, to the best of our ability, to be avoided. When actually sitting and meditating, it is not helpful at all to try to remember what it is that we did last week or last month or last year or even longer ago. By all means, it is not a bad thing to remind oneself of what it is that one has done and to remember how it is, how one did things, etc. and so forth, but not at that particular moment. At such a moment of actually sitting down and meditating, looking at MindNature or whatever it is that one might be meditating upon, at such a moment, these thoughts, these memories, these ideas are not helpful at all. So therefore, at that time, try to avoid them, try to let such thoughts rest. At the same time, it is also not useful to think ahead at this particular moment about what it is that you might have to do tomorrow or day after tomorrow or next month or next year. By all means, it's a useful thing to plan ahead to a certain extent and to plan what it is that needs to be done and how it needs to be done and when it needs to be done. But again, not at that particular moment. At the moment of sitting down and meditating, of contemplating MindNature, of trying to understand the nature of phenomena and appearances, whatever it might be, at such a moment, such thoughts are rather unhelpful. So again, be they thoughts of the past or be they thoughts of the future, at the moment of actually meditating, of sitting in a meditation session, such thoughts are to be avoided. At other times, when one then comes to the post-meditation session, having gotten up again from one's cushion and being out and about, running back and forth, doing whatever it is that one usually does, then such thoughts are okay, not while meditating. So having thus been informed about how we should proceed while actually meditating, and when we actually sit down to do it, various states might present themselves. We may, for instance, experience a state of mind which is free of any mental activity, at least for a while. A state of mind that is utterly quiet, tranquil, blissful for that matter, while being quiet and tranquil. And such a state of mind that comes along without any particular mental activity going on, without any thoughts going on, or memories of whatever sort appearing in our mind stream, that particular state is simply called stillness. One could also call it resting, for that matter. So stillness or resting. And by all means, we should train ourselves to simply be aware of that fact. So whenever mind presents itself in a tranquil way, still, a resting state of mind, simply be aware of mind being so. That's it. Nothing else needs to be done. At other times, of course, mind, or whatever happens within this mind, may present itself altogether differently. There may be all sorts of thoughts, all sorts of memories and ideas going on, and that kind of state is simply called movement, or activity for that matter. And again, if that is the case, simply train yourself in being aware of that fact. So these are the two states in which mind can present itself during a meditation session. It could either be still, could either be restful or tranquil. Well, if that's the case, simply be aware of that and let it be at that. Or it could be active, it could be all sorts of thoughts and ideas and memories which are going through our mind. Well, in that case, mind is moving. There is movement, there is activity going on in that mind stream of ours. Again, the same advice applies. Simply be aware of it. Whether mind is still or active, simply train in being clearly, freshly aware of what it is that is going on in your mind. Nothing else needs to be done. So in this way, mind or consciousness may present itself in either of these two states. These are the two main states, for that matter, in which consciousness would manifest itself during a meditation session. Either it is still, it's quiet and tranquil, free of any mental activity, or there is mental activity, thoughts which are going off into all different sorts of directions. I didn't mention that line before. It says going off into the 10 directions. That is a state that is known as movement. And then we have a third aspect to this. The third aspect is the simply being aware of what it is that is going on with that mind, in that mind at any given moment. We might either have stillness or we may have movement. And at any moment, we're simply aware of what it is that's going on, freshly, vividly aware of what it is happening. And as it then says in the next line, even though these three appear to be different, present themselves seemingly differently, stillness, movement, awareness, even though that might be the case, they are essentially one and the same. They're not different in any which way from each other at all, even though they may present themselves so. So as we have heard, these three are not different from each other. No matter whether the mind presents itself quiet, still, or tranquil, or whether the mind presents itself active, or whether one is simply aware of either state. There's no difference between these. It is said that if mind rests free of any activity, free of any mental activity such as thought movements or memories or whatever, that tranquil, quiet state of mind corresponds to what is called the Dharma. However, when eventually thoughts move again, mental activity becomes active again in any which way, this, which we call movement, corresponds to that which is known as the Nirmanakaya. And simply being aware of either of these two states without any further ado, just being aware of them without attempting any alteration of whatever state of mind presents itself, that corresponds to the so-called Sambhogakaya. And as we have heard, even though the three may present themselves differently, they are not different from each other in any which way. They are a unity, so to speak, a union. They are not to be separated in any which way. And that fact is nothing other but the essence body, which is called the Svabhavikakaya in Sanskrit. So in this way, these three states, these three different ways of mind or mind nature or consciousness presenting itself, being either still or active or simply aware of either fact, that in itself already carries the seed or the cause for the accomplishment of the three Buddhakayas.
And in the Gampopa, around the town, Jun, they see Mingo, so on. And Senji Tangi, Senji, Sonji, Compon Topas, Yo, there was a Mingo, Yo. There are then Jipadon for me, Cheparioma. Jipadon, Sibake, Cheparioma. Mado, Tundruke, Chepariom, Sentin Tangi, Senji, there was a Mingo. Sonji, Jodi, Yo. The Yanayang, the Danjun, Toki down, that becomes a shake, Yamsa Marona, the Tanga, Tondro, Tadon, Zayda, Nyadon, Barbara, 다 던지게 생라 대어시비 님보도 조조래 옛날에 디게 깝자라 명설랜데 깔와도 메딘바 아 대연도 세상에 통지게 생라 대어님이 님보 조조 somba ndandawala tingne somwale.
As the great Gampopa states right at the beginning of his great path, his teachings, how we can, the teachings which we are supposed to familiarize ourselves with gradually, he says the potential is BuddhaNature, that which we know under the term of Dharma, the potential, the driving force, is that BuddhaNature. And that is so for each and every being of whatever sort it might be. BuddhaNature is not limited to human beings. BuddhaNature is the potential of all beings. It does not make any difference whether we find ourselves to be male or female, young, old, whether we find ourselves to be born human or in the animal realm or anywhere else for that matter. All beings are equally endowed with that potential. However, as the explanation goes on, clearly it is only with a precious human birth, a birth that is endowed with the 8 leisures and the 10 riches, as they're called, that we are able to make good use of that potential, that we're able to bring that potential to the fore. If we were born in the animal realm, for instance, even though we might be mighty animals such as tigers or lions, or we might be reborn as a fish or a frog or whatever, if that were the case, the opportunity to make use of the potential would not be given, it would not be present. It is solely in the human body that is endowed with all of these freedoms and leisures and riches that gives us the opportunity to actualize that potential of ours. If we were to practice accordingly, we would, as we're informed in the next verse, come to recognize that there is neither good nor bad in either stillness or movement. So neither stillness nor movement are to be preferred over the other. There is no reason whatsoever to hanker after the one state and try to avoid the other, or vice versa. If occasionally mind presents itself totally tranquil and quiet, without any mental movement going on, without any thought activity going on, no preference to be attached to that, there's no particular need to alter that state of mind in any which way. Similarly, when mind presents itself full of thoughts, full of activity, and does not want to be still at all, simply train in being aware of that fact. There's no reason whatsoever to try to make it still by all kinds of means at your disposal. Simply leave it at that and be aware of that. Nothing more needs to be done whatsoever. Therefore, it also says in the next line, do not have any preference, simply maintain whatever arises, which again means to say clearly either state is as good as the other. There's no reason whatsoever to to introduce any alteration to the one or other state. Simply train in being freshly, vividly aware of it, period. Finally, we are then advised to train ourselves in such a way so as to look or examine repeatedly, however for brief periods, but to repeat these periods many times, however many times is convenient or possible. And only then, gradually, later, after we have habituated ourselves to doing so, look for longer and longer periods. By all means, we may be enthusiastic and very enthusiastic of going about such meditation practice, and we may think that now we have to force ourselves through long meditation sessions to truly see what there is to be seen or not to be seen. However, at the very beginning, that would be rather counterproductive. Presently, the vast majority of us does not yet have the ability to sit for long periods of time. And when we sit down and watch MindNature or whatever it is that we might be doing, while sitting down, after a couple of minutes our knees might start hurting, our legs might start cramping, our back might start being painful, etc. and so forth. And then to force yourself to continue to be disciplined and diligent, which in other cases certainly are good qualities, at this particular point would not be particularly helpful. It would rather more cause yourself all sorts of problems, your mind and body would tire and would make things all the more difficult for the future. Therefore, we are being advised time and again to begin with short sessions, a couple of minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes or some such, but to repeat them as often as we're able to, as often as is convenient. We sit down for 5 minutes, for 10 minutes, we practice according to the instructions, and when things start to become uncomfortable, by all means it is permissible to get up, to relax, to interrupt the session, to stretch one's legs, and if after a short while it is possible and one feels like continuing the session, sitting down again to continue one's examination of the MindNature, then one does so. One sits down again, one continues with one's meditation in order to look at what there is to be seen or rather not to be seen. There is no point whatsoever, as long as we're beginners in this discipline, to force ourselves to be more disciplined than is convenient. And as we habituate ourselves to practicing in such a way, then all by itself, without our doing anything in particular about it, both our minds as well as our bodies will be more attuned to this kind of discipline. And then the periods of being able to sit in a relaxed and comfortable way and looking freshly, vividly at MindNature will all by themselves become longer and longer. So therefore, time and again, as we've heard so many times, short sessions, often repeated, are definitely more helpful, particularly as we're beginners in these disciplines, than trying to force yourself through long meditation sessions which only cause you pain and all sorts of other aches. What all of this means to say is simply that presently, while we're beginners in this discipline, we would not be well advised to force ourselves through long sessions, but we would be much better advised to practice short sessions which we repeat as often as is possible, as often as is convenient. If we train ourselves in this way, if we habituate ourselves in this way, habituate both our minds as well as our bodies to such kind of practice, then eventually all by itself, without any further ado, our meditation sessions will naturally become longer. Our body will be able to sit longer without pains and kinks and whatnot, and our mind will be able to be concentrated, one-pointed for longer periods. That will happen all by itself, and nothing in particular needs to be done about it. What remains is the final, the last line of this chapter. The chapters in this particular teaching of Dharma chapters being called songs, and it says here, this concludes the 5th song, which teaches about the practice of generation and completion for beginners. So as we have heard in the course of the preceding chapters or the preceding songs, post-generation process practice meditation as well as perfection process meditation are the processes in which we need to train ourselves. And these, up to this particular point, concluding with this 5th chapter or 5th song of Dharma chapters, have so far been explained. Thus, says Rinpoche, I have taught for years, and thus you have sat here and listened for years, which is all nice and well, but when it comes down to it, me talking, you listening, in itself doesn't do the trick. What we have to do is put into practice what I have been talking about, and you have been listening to. Therefore, Rinpoche has decided that this year we shall spend more time on the actual putting into practice of that what Rinpoche has been teaching us over the course of the last couple of courses, so that we gain an experience, a hands-on experience, so to speak, of what it is that all of that talk is about. As we have heard, if mind or consciousness presents itself free of any activity, if mind or consciousness is completely tranquil and quiet, that is called stillness. And when stillness appears, or when stillness manifests itself in this way, nothing else needs to be done but simply be aware of mind being tranquil, of mind being in a resting state, of there being stillness. Then eventually, after a couple of seconds, no doubt, thoughts will stir again. This stirring of thoughts is what we call movement. nothing other needs to be done but simply be aware of movement. In this way we will experience the two states of either stillness or movement. And the only thing that needs to be done is to train yourself to vividly and freshly be aware of it. That is all that needs to be done. Let us now, at this moment here, train in exactly that.
Tata, and Rochuan Tonki in Laka Tuma, Laka Taxamba, Yabu. And Tata Leka Leki Tonkila, that to say your money, Papa, Hadoni Gumoma, Leka, Roku. And I see Jena, Leka, your money, Leku, Tayan, any Zupo Premica, and Nepal, and the Nina, and Rote, Gotona, then Mass again, the Yapoli, Naran Song, and then Rana Hundred, Jeba, the Dharma Juna, come up with the train logic to talk to us and drink the Bala, and do saw the Chandro Treaty, Dodges and Treaty, Mendra Treaty, Ramana Treaty, John Jira. There was a challenge. The Yakona, Danger Tang Eva, and make that true Tanki, then Zawandra, Mijindra, then the Hindu, then the Mupati, Yona, then me, come up, some 100 dupa, wrong down.
Those of you who are young will certainly undergo some sort of education at the present moment. And by all means, that should be your main focus at present. Others who have already dispensed with their education may find themselves working for their livelihoods in some way or other and may be greatly involved in that. There may also be those among the ones present who do not have to work for whatever reason. Either they don't have to work anymore, or they don't have to work because other means of livelihood are available. However that may be, it would be a very advisable thing if all of you could practice the preliminary practices in one way or other. Those of you who, for the mentioned reasons, are unable to undergo the extensive preliminary practices, which entails the 100,000-fold repetition of prostrations, Vajrasattva mantras, mandala offering, and Guru Yoga practices, could at least train themselves in the short version that was presented very recently by His Holiness the present 17th Gampopa Ujjain Trinidorje. The most perfect way, of course, of going about one's preliminary practice would be to practice the full 100,000 of each. But if that is not possible for whatever reason, any of the named ones or any other reason, then it would at least be a good thing to practice the brief version of the preliminary practice, which entails a repetition of 10,000 of each of the aforementioned practices. For those of you who have an interest to begin with that practice or take up that particular practice, Rinpoche will now offer the oral transmission, the lung for that particular text that has been composed by His Holiness the Gampopa.